my own professional slide turner. Awesome. So I get the joy of going after lunch. It's always fun. I see some of you have coffee, so good choice. I was going to pay Gary off to get coffee for everyone, but it doesn't look like that worked. So he owes me money somewhere. So next. So thank you to everyone who came out here today. Greatly appreciated. Big thanks to Brian, Carrie, Gary, Facility, Eric, everyone in MPI, all of you guys for traveling from far away, and some of you really far away to get here. It's an honor to work with all these guys. I first met Brian in, I think, 2005. He was down in Arizona doing a presentation for the IYCA, and I saw him just kind of sitting off on the side, and was like, oh, it's like kind of, he looks kind of angry, a bunch of tattoos. I don't know, but I'll go talk to him. So literally just talked to him just for a couple minutes, and that was it. He doesn't remember the conversation, so it's okay. Then just started following all this stuff, and actually signed up again for one of the first FTR coaching programs he had 4 years ago now? 4, yeah. And I remember, same thing you guys have probably done too. He's like, hey, I got a new coaching program coming out. It's awesome. So I go to the link, sign up, send my money. Hey Brian, I signed up for your new coaching course. Can you tell me what it's on? I have absolutely no idea what I even bought. So we just started talking and everything from there. So now we're here, which is pretty awesome. Next. You can't tell, that's a water ski picture of me, and yes, I'm actually wearing a lab coat in that picture. So I do stuff like that for fun, just because I think it's fun. From snowboarding to even kiteboarding. I do a lot of experiments. You guys have probably heard. So who in here, like if you get married or live with your significant other, has a temperature difference in your house? Anyone have that issue? Someone likes it one way, someone likes it the other way. So when I got married to Jody about 5 years ago now, so we initially moved in. I was used to having the house in the winter pretty cold, like 62, 63 Fahrenheit, a little chilly. She was not too fond of that. She said there's penguins running around and stuff. So I said, okay, so we turned up the temperature. And so like any other good scientist, in my thought process, I'm thinking, all right, so there's, homeostatic regulations of temperature, and then take a while. So over time, I turned the temperature down a little bit, and I didn't tell her. So yeah, let's see if we can get by 71 for a while. Didn't hear anything, all right, let's try 70. And then she's like, it seems colder in here. All right, so back up to 71 again. So I had a little algorithm in my head for how far down I would run the temperature and how often she would complain, so then I would go back up. And if I didn't hear any complaints for 2 weeks, I'd try to go back down again. So over the course of 3 years, I got her down to, it was right around 64 degrees. And if you ask her, she would say she was very compliant and bought lots of fuzzy socks and hooded sweatshirts and stuff too. What's even funnier is she knew nothing about this till I told that story at the fitness summit 2 years ago. And she's sitting in the front row, and I see her look, and for a split second I see her go like, I was like, oh, oof. Made it past that one, all right. So, next. That's me wearing a lab coat snowboarding, so, next. So here's our outline for today. And what's interesting is I literally wrote this first line like 4 days ago before I got here. So it's amazing how well that jives. So are you in or out? Rig the system, low-hanging fruit, security blanket associations, readjust older associations, create new ones, and then when all else fails. So all that probably sounds a lot like Greek right now. Hopefully in the end, it'll make sense. So next. That was my alternative outline. I was just going to do that, so be all good. Next. So unlearning and learning, how I think of them is they're almost like two sides of the same coin, right? There's a lot of debate in literature about what is really unlearning, what is really learning, how are they interface with each other. So the purpose of this talk is I'm primarily just going to focus on unlearning, and in the module 2, level 2, module 3, I do a whole module actually on learning. So I need to do my Ryan Lee upsell voice, you know, go out and run out and buy it or whatever. So for this one, I did primarily just unlearning. I did a horrible disservice to have been there. So next. So this one is just actually the only picture of a neuron I have in the whole slide. And I think if we look at it, it makes a lot more sense to think about how neurons are next to each other in just terms of associations. So in our brain, we've got tons of neurons everywhere, which is just the basic formation of it. And they're all interconnected in multiple different ways. And it's hard even when you just look at pictures, because all the pictures show just this 2D representation. And in reality, it's all three-dimensional, so there's different connections all around. And we used to think that years ago, so example, if you're looking at pain, there's got to be one pain center in the brain. We find that pain center, we'll go in with some RF ablation or something and burn that crap out. No more pain. Woohoo! We're awesome. And as you can figure out, that didn't work at all. So what they found with certain things is that it was distributed all throughout the brain. And while there's certain areas that do primarily more functions than other areas, it's just not really that simple. So I think if we look at it and think of in terms of associations, how well these are just plain and connected with each other. So this goes in the concept of neuroplasticity. You guys here probably heard of neuroplasticity before. We did that in level 1 also. And years ago, they used to think that your brain does not change, once you reach adulthood. And now what we find is almost the direct opposite of that. Your brain is probably what they call the most plastic, or has the highest ability for change. So a fancy word there is neuroplasticity. And we're constantly building and tearing these associations with neurons next to each other. So it's not really a stagnant process, and there's not a ton of research to show what that turnover rate is, but it's probably pretty high, right? So something that has a greater capacity for change, most likely you have those being built up and torn down at very, very similar rates so that you can affect a greater amount of change that much faster. So instead of thinking of just all the fancy terms for neurons and astrocytes and all the stuff that's in there, if you just think about them in terms of associations and how they're connected and how they relate to each other, you'll be doing good. Next. So you have all the time in the world to learn everything you need to be learned, and you have less time to unlearn, right? Anyone heard of Malcolm Gladwell before? This from the book Outliers. Yeah, really good book. His other stuff I think is also really good. The book Blink, if anyone hasn't read that, I would highly recommend it. It's a little bit old now, but really, really fascinating stuff. Next. I pulled the video off just because technology just hates me. But what you can see here is that it's called a backwards bike. Has anyone seen that video? The brain backwards bike? Yeah, it's really cool. So what this guy did is he went to a local welder. Maybe you guys worked with local welders. They're amazing. They can create just the craziest stuff. And it's hard to see, but he put an extra gear on between the handlebar and basically the headset that goes to the wheel. And you can see here that if you go to the right, the wheel, because of the extra gear, is going to go to the left. Right? So this is the direct opposite of anyone who's ridden a bike, right? How many of you have ridden a bike, right? Most people? Anyone not ridden a bike? No? All right. So right? Turn the handlebars to the right, the wheel goes to the right. So what do you think your chances of everyone in this room, your ability on rep 1 to ride that bike? Good or bad?
I still want to try.
Yeah, I know, I do too. I'm like, I'm going to be the one person who can do it. But probably not. So he has this challenge where he gives people, he does tours, a lot of money if they can ride the bike all the way across stage. So far, according to him, no one's made it on their first try. Why would that be so hard? Why is that hard?
Because we go with what we already know.
Yeah, what we've already learned, right? So we learned that when we turn the wheel to the right, the wheel goes to the right. In this case, it's a direct opposite, right? So we're unconsciously programmed in the way that we can ride a bike. What's cool about that is it's very much a learned skill. So if you haven't ridden a bike for maybe even 5, 10 years, I would bet if we put a bike in front of you now, you could probably still go out and ride, right? That program is still held in your brain, and it's pretty rare with those things that you'll ever really forget them. However, this is a direct opposite of that. So if it's a direct opposite of that, what would you have to do in order to be able to ride that?
Fall.
What'd you say? Fall? Possibly. What else?
Unconsciously override that mechanism, that subconscious mechanism.
Yeah.
Every time. So it's almost like, you know, when you're learning how to shift a gear in your car where you can consciously think about it. It's not
Yep.
automatic yet.
Yeah. So you're exactly correct. So riding a bike for most people is unconscious, and hopefully most of you are competent in it. So to do this, you then have to change that programming somehow. And the first step of that is to be conscious. And what's fascinating about this too is he got so frustrated with it that he's like, I'm going to teach myself how to ride this darn bike. And he went out every couple minutes for months and months and months, still really wasn't able to do it. They took his kid, who hadn't really ridden a bike much at all before, and said, okay, I'm going to have you teach you to ride this one. Which do you think learned faster, him or his kid? Kid, why? Especially based on what Carrie was saying. Right, not much to unlearn, right? Not much to unlearn, no other program really to alter. So the kid was able to do it a lot faster. What's fascinating about the guy who came up with this is that he was eventually able to learn how to do it, but it took a long, long time. And what to me the most fascinating part about that is that he literally went from very little success, months, and then literally almost within one day, he was able to ride for several feet all at once. So the key with that is that people think that everything happens very linear, right? So you're working with clients, you're trying to change their mindset, you're doing all the cool stuff that we teach here, and sometimes it gets really frustrating because you're like, I'm just not making any progress. And then literally almost sometimes it appears to be overnight, wow, they just figured something out and they're off going in some other direction. So learning and even unlearning is not purely a linear process. There's usually going to be, sometimes they call it an inflection point in there, where all of a sudden now everything just starts working really well. There's various theories about why that happens. One of the theories is that maybe some of the neurons are trying to connect from opposite ends, and all of a sudden when they connect, now you've got a communication pathway. So I have the YouTube link on there. When we get the slides, you can watch it. It's really, really interesting.
Would someone who's dyslexic have an easier time?
That's what I wonder too, and my guess is probably not, although it's a really good question, because if their bike riding skills are really good, for that aspect, they'd probably be really good. But it's a good question, right? So a lot of the questions are, what if someone's more left-handed or right-handed? Probably not really different, but it's actually a really good question. Yep. Next. So learning versus unlearning. So why is unlearning so slow, right? In essence, it's because you have a lot of associations and connections with whatever it is you're trying to unlearn. And the sad part of the whole talk is you can speed up unlearning, but if it's something that's really, really deeply held, especially in their unconscious, it's going to take some time and it's going to take some work. It's not something you're going to expect to resolve very, very fast. So I'm not trying to piss on your leg and tell you it's raining or anything like that, right? That's just the reality of what it is. So I call that, if you have something that's that embedded, I got this from Landon Evans, that it's their security blanket. It's something that they feel really, really comfortable with, whether it's a story or a motor programming or whatever, they feel really comfortable with it, and odds are they've probably had it for a long period of time. Longer period of time they've had it, more ability to create more and more associations. It's going to be much harder for them to unlearn. And some people even go as far to say is, I don't think you can never unlearn that, which I don't agree with at all. I think you can unlearn and unlearn whatever you want. It just may take more time to do that. Next. So the big question then is, for exercise, so what exercise do you feel is responsible for most of your progress? Right? You could change this to mindset, what story do you feel most attached to, that type of thing. What you're trying to get to is, what do they have built the most associations? What do they currently believe is responsible for most of their success. So if a client comes in and tells me, I say, hey, what exercise is most responsible for your current success? Oh man, it's, standing on the Bosu bow with my right arm and I'm doing left arm bicep curls while I'm watching birds fly by or whatever. It could be like the weirdest, dumbest thing of what I think an exercise is. But do you think that that's probably going to show up in their program? Would you say yes or no?
No.
I would say yes, right? Why? What are the odds are that they're going to be able to drop that exercise from their programming for the next couple months? Good or bad? Probably pretty bad, right? Because they think they have a whole bunch of associations for whatever weird reason that that's what's responsible for their success. Right? So if I send them a program and it's not in there, their first thought is going to be, who's this crazy ass trainer I hired? He's a moron. I told him what the best exercise for me is and he didn't put it in my program. Whether you disagree with the exercise or not, very debatable. In their head, they're thinking, oh, it's not in my program. This guy doesn't even bother to listen to what I told him, right? So that I would say is probably also a way to identify what their sort of security blanket is. And that's probably going to be the thing that's going to be one of the harder things to change. And what's really hard is that people want to change that thing first. And they're going to pound their head against the wall, right? And they go, oh, why is this client not listening to me? I can't figure out what's going on, right? And you're literally asking them to unlearn a whole bunch of stuff within a very short period of time. So I would say don't start there. But know that you're going to try to modify it over time. But if you can identify sort of what that is, whether that's mindset, it's a big story that they have, things of that nature, always be aware of it. And by definition, you definitely want them to work on it. But I would not expect them to make a massive change with that overnight. Next. So start with what is easy, right? So I call it rig the system. They don't recognize who that guy is?
Wall Street. Wall Street.
Yeah. What is he famous for?
Green's good.
Right. Exactly. So I typed that rig the system into Dr. Google, and that's the picture it spit out. So that's pretty appropriate. That's how you pick a lot of your images real fast. So it's okay when you're working with someone to rig the system so that they're successful, right? In my opinion, that's a good idea to do, right? Because if they believe, let's say, one of their stories is that they're not successful for whatever reason, you want to set up their initial program, whether that's training, nutrition, mindset coaching, so that they are successful going forward. So that may be a little bit of a slower process. So they're going to have fewer associations with things that are relatively new, right? So one of the things that I did purely by accident, when I have a gym where I train people primarily out of my garage, people would come in and they'd say, hey, what type of exercise have you done for whatever your goal? Oh, my goal is fat loss. All right. I did a lot of that machine training, wherever they had, and the guy just counted reps, 3 by 10, and that's all I did. Oh, okay. We don't do any of that stuff here. Now look at the gym. It's like, power rack, kettlebells, tires, sledgehammers. So we don't use any of those things you did before. And I would literally tell them that, this is more successful. This will work much better for you. It's kind of sort of a lie, but the reality is I knew that the program I was going to do with them would work. And I was trying to disassociate myself from all the other sort of past failures that they had. I wanted them to start with making new associations without trying to connect it to everything that they've ever done before in their life. So if you can find something that's new, and especially if it's in even a different context, or just make it a little bit different, even change the wording, whatever, they're less likely to try to take that thing and connect it to everything else over time. So that'll be your easiest way to do that. So if they say maybe they change their goals, right? I just want to do some running for a while. All right. Have you ever ran before? No. Okay. I'm not going to probably have you run 10 miles, right? Not only is that physically a risk, what happens if you fail and miss 10 miles? How are they going to feel? Right. Failure, right? oh, I suck at this too. Ah, I sucked at all the other stuff I did before, right? And they'll try to go down the downward spiral and try to connect that to their unconscious story that they've had before. But if I say, let's just run a quarter mile and see how that goes. Oh, good. Well, see, you did that. That's more than you've ever ran before. Cool, you already got a PR. Awesome. It sounds kind of weird, right? You're like, oh my God, why'd you start with even a quarter mile? That's not going to do much, right? But you want them to build on those small successes, right? You want to keep those new associations going. Next. So one of the things I use this to destroy the unlearning is bubble gum, right? Anyone got bubble gum stuck in their hair before? Yeah, a couple people, all right, yeah. So the question I would have is, if we put it in someone like Jody's hair, compared to, where'd Brian go? Brian's here. A little bit of hair that Brian has, which one is going to get stuck in more? Why? More hair, right? She actually has hair, right? Yeah, exactly. So you can think of the hair as, in essence, the same thing as, oh, I even got a pointer, that's cool. The hair is that they're associations that they're neuronally making, right? So the bubble gum is, whatever crazy idea they have or whatever it is. If you don't have that many associations connected to it, it's going to be pretty easy to get out, right? But the more embedded that it is, it's going to be much harder to get out. So in terms of mindset, if people get, let's say, the analogy of bubble gum stuck in their hair, what's the first thing they normally do then at that point, after they complain that it's stuck in their hair? They try to get it out, but what happens most of the time when they try to get it out? It gets worse, right? What do? They almost completely entangle it, so it's like a huge mess. Now how easy is it to get out? Not easy, is it? Right? So the reason I mention that is that be careful when people want to associate, whether it's a new mindset, nutrition, exercise, or whatever, to what they did before. It's almost like the bubble gum in your hair. They have a tendency to really want to entangle it and go, well, now I'm screwed. Oh, it's just a big mess now, right? So there's different wording and stuff you can watch in clients. And again, like the exercise example, I try to keep them separate. I don't want their sort of failures becoming attached to what they had done in the past. Make sense so far? Did I lose anyone there? No? All right, next. So after you've done that, you would what I call stress test it. So I'm a big metal fan. I don't know if everyone's seen the band Cataclysm. They're a Canadian death metal band. But they have this thing where they call it the security stress test. I think they actually got banned in a couple countries for doing it. But what they do is they encourage everyone in the crowd to form this huge, massive mosh pit and see how many people they can throw over the barrier. So a security guard has to take all these people down at one time. So I would say that the next thing you can do with your clients, I was going to play some for you, but I won't, is to then test to see what those associations are and how they show up again. And we'll come back to that, so you can go to the next one there. The caveat I would say with this is be kind of careful. Again, you want to rig the system, start with whatever is easiest first. But over time, you want to then see how that association plays out. What other words are they sort of connecting it to in their head? So if I go back to the example of running a quarter mile, so a client comes in, let's say on Wednesday, and I say, like, what are we doing today? It's, let's do some running again, right? That was your goal. All right, cool. I said, what did you think about your performance on Monday? And they may just say, yeah, I ran a quarter mile. Woo! That was awesome. I've never done that before. Yay! Or they may come back and say, oh, I only ran a quarter mile. I looked online, and Joe Bob from God knows where told me that that's pretty horrible performance, right? In the second case, so your stress test was, one, asking them about it, right? And then two, you're looking to see what did they associate that with. If it's the latter, they're trying to go back down sort of the downward spiral again. They're associated through various comparisons and other things back to what they associated as failure from before. So I usually don't like to ask them this until I know that they're probably going to give me the correct answer, right? So I may, on Wednesday, just remind them about how good they did on Monday and never ask them what they thought of it. right? Until I'm pretty darn sure that they're going to give me the correct answer. Because I'm a little afraid that I don't want them to start creating those associations back to where they did before. So this brings up what's called cognitive dissonance, which we have on the next slide. And I'll give you an example at the end of how we do all this. So cognitive dissonance is the mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who holds two or more contrary beliefs, ideas, or values at the same time, is confronted with new information that conflicts with their existing beliefs, ideas, or values. So in essence, they have conflicting ideas in their head about this was good or this was bad. Right? An example is usually food. Right? So how many people work on a nutrition basis with clients? Yep. So how many clients come in and say this was a good or this was a bad food? Does that happen to anyone? Or how many people believe that themselves, right? Oh, this is a good food, that's a bad food. But what happens if their context changes? So I remember John Berardi saying once that someone asked me, said, wow, peanut M&Ms, are they good or bad? It's like, well, depends on where you're at, right? It's like if you're walking around during the day, could you make a better nutritional choice than peanut M&Ms? Probably. If you're on a desert island and you're tired of eating coconuts, and the only thing you have is peanut M&Ms, they're pretty good, right? They're pretty awesome. Like you find a chest full of peanut M&Ms, your day is made, right? So I sometimes use that example to explain to clients to try to get them to think that, okay, this food they thought was bad, well, here's an example where it was actually good. Oh, I'm not so sure if that's now good or bad, or maybe I just need to go to a desert island and get stuck. Then I can eat peanut M&Ms, right? So you're trying to get them to at least think a little bit about cases in their head that don't necessarily agree. Next. So failure is a powerful motivator for change. I think too often we are very afraid of clients, quote unquote, failing or not doing well, even with ourselves at the same time. So there's no failure, only feedback. And what's interesting is that neuronally we attach the emotion that's associated that to whatever feedback it is. And I know I'm entirely guilty of this. So when I was doing my PhD, my advisor would send me something back. Normally it wasn't the nicest words known to man, but I would have a lot of attachments I would attach to that of, oh my gosh, this isn't good enough, this is horrible, this is bad, I need to change this, rework all that. I was adding a lot of emotional significance to the feedback. And so that's a process that we all do in our own head, a lot of times subconsciously. Right? So how many people have just had someone say something that wasn't really necessarily positive or bad, but kind of neutral, and you just go, oh, so-and-so doesn't like me now, or oh, they must hate me, or oh, blah, blah, blah. Right? So failure is necessarily good or bad, so just be careful when you work with clients and yourself of the words that they sort of associate with it. So for example, if they're doing an exercise, and you say, hey, let's try and do this exercise this way. And they're like, oh, so you're telling me the last one was bad? Like, no, I'm just saying that this is a better way, to do it. Right? So be careful the words that they want to attach to that. Next, yep. So here's like the 5 steps you would go through to unlearn something. So are you in or out? And it's perfectly okay to opt out, right? There's nothing wrong with that at all. I actually opted out of golf because I played golf when I did my master's, and it was more an excuse to get out on a nice day and drink beer in the golf course, basically, is what it was. And I figured, well, I'm out there, might as well try to hit the ball around. And looking back on it, I realized that I was headed towards the downward slope when, if there'd be like a water hazard, I would take out the oldest ball that I found like out in the woods somewhere that had like scratches through it, because I was convinced it was going to go in the water anyway. I would buy the bright colored orange ones so that I could see them when I whack them into the woods somewhere. And then I'd buy the X-out ones because they were a lot cheaper, and I don't care about the quality of them. And it basically was out like slicing balls into the woods, killing squirrels, or I would destroy earthworms on the way to just barely not making it past the women's tee. And I knew I was really screwed when instead of lining up square to the ball, I started lining up like this, because my slice was so bad off to the right, but that way it would go halfway straight and I wouldn't have to get another ball out that I just bought at Target on sale, because it was out in the woods somewhere. So luckily I realized this and decide, okay, I'm just going to opt out of golf. Right? So if I continue down that path, what am I actually doing in terms of golf performance? Yeah, I'm reinforcing bad habits, right? So I said, okay, I'm either going to take instruction, work to try to get better at it, or I'm just going to opt out and not do it, right? I'm not going to get any better, but I'm sure as I'm not going to get any worse and keep burning in all these bad habits. So it's perfectly okay to opt out of something, right? It just depends upon your goals. So I think you have to sometimes explain that to clients and yourself. Do I want to do this or that? And if I'm not really improving at this, is it something I really want to keep doing? And it's okay if you don't want to do it anymore. It's perfectly fine. I'll give you permission if you need that. All right, next. So rig the system. The question you want to ask yourself is, where can you get a small win? Right? So just think of that in your head when you're working with clients. And the hardest part with that usually is that we actually don't think small enough. We think that, oh, they're going to be disappointed if they don't do something, really crazy or whatever. But I would say start smaller, make sure they get a win, and then just build on that. Whether that's nutrition, whether that's mindset, whether that's they wrote in their journal that you wanted to have them do the other day, whatever it is, right? And if they don't do it, I'll use it just like an exercise. If they can't do barbell back squat, I'll regress them down to something that's easier. So if I said, hey, go write a paragraph in your journal tonight, and they go, well, I can't do that. Okay. Can you write 2 sentences? Maybe, right? So let's say they don't even do that. I would literally then ask them, do you have a journal? Oh, yes, I have one. Cool. Awesome. You got one. That's cool. And literally the next question may be, I want you to take your journal, I want you to open it tonight and look at the page, take a picture, close it, and send the photo to me. Oh, you don't want me to write anything in it? No, don't care. What? You're crazy. This is too easy. All right, well, show me, right? Send me your photo. So a lot of times I think we expect them, because in our mind it may be easy for us to do, but it may actually be really, really, really hard for them to do. So I will descale everything back as far as I can until they can get a win. So, okay, yeah, I send you 2 photos in my journal. Cool. All right, I want you to write 1 sentence in there tonight. Well, what is it about? I don't care. Write a nursery rhyme. I don't care what it is, right? And then, okay, now I want you to write about a specific topic, right? So what you're doing is you're creating a new association, especially if they've never done journaling before, and then you're starting with what's the smallest thing that they can do, so then they get the positive reinforcement that you're kind of always going forward and not necessarily backward on that. Obviously use all your MPI skills, awareness, education, accountability. And I always say start with the thing that has the fewest associations, right? Would you want to start with their security blanket, whatever that is?
No.
No, why not?
Because they're really
Yeah, a lot of associations. It's going to be hard to change, right? So start with something they probably haven't done before. So journaling is usually a pretty good one. Writing down what you did in the gym, and writing how you feel when you first get up in the morning. It doesn't matter necessarily what it is, but if it's new and they've never really done it before, that's probably your greatest leverage point to start. Next. So security blankets, we talked about this. Again, the biggest thing, don't start there, right? And this will actually drive you bananas for a while. Because I've written programs, and in your head, right, you go through all these things. Oh my God, my client's going to take this program, and they're going to put it online. I'm going to show up on Facebook somewhere, and they're going to be like, look at this stupid-ass exercise this guy's doing. What the heck's wrong with him, right? And all the weird stuff that may happen. But those are going to take time to actually change. So it's a little bit harder for the coach, or even for yourself, to give yourself permission that if it's a really, really embedded story, or exercise, bad form, bad habit, whatever, it's going to take you some time to actually change that. So I would say don't necessarily start with that. Start with something that you can get a win, and then as you get more confidence, as you do better in your own ability, believe in yourself, all the things we talk about, then you can go back and start readdressing some of those other things. And we have an example of this coming up. Yeah. So stress tested, evaluated. Did it work? And then the example I have of this is, so I worked in the medical device industry for quite a while, And one of the things I thought was just wacky is that they would implant pacemakers and defibrillators in people. They go in, so defibrillator, like you guys have all seen ER, right, where they shock someone externally. It's the same idea, but the device is internally, so all implanted. And then we go in, they do the procedure, put it in, and then the doctor, and the reps, and the nurses, they all stand around, and the physician would literally induce a lethal arrhythmia into the patient, and they'd all stand there like this, and watch it to see if it actually worked. And the first time I saw that, I'm like, this is insane. What the heck are they doing? They're all standing around, and I'm thinking, oh, I hope this thing works. I hope this thing works. But if you think about it, if the patient's going to leave, and they're walking around in an environment where the device was not tested, and they have some type of lethal arrhythmia, let's say they're walking down the street in front of Gary's gym or whatever, and something happens, I think I would rather know that it was tested 2 or 3 times in a place where there's a bunch of doctors, physicians, nurses all standing around, all scrubbed in, standing there watching me, to treat it in case something didn't work. So I give you that example just to think that if you're going to ask them or sort of stress test or evaluate it, you kind of really want to know what their answer is going to be initially, right? Because you're not always going to be right, but you want to try to keep those new associations positive. Next. And so this is what I call when all else fails, or I fell asleep after lunch and didn't understand a single word that guy said. Does anyone recognize who that is? George Costanza, right? When people watch Seinfeld still, right? Oh, I did this in some of my classes and people are like, who is that, Seinfeld? And I'm like, oh, I feel so old. Did you ever see the one episode where George starts doing the opposite of everything he's ever done in his life? What happens then? Right, he starts becoming successful, so everything in essence turns around with him. So I call that the Costanza principle, that if you get completely lost and you have no idea what to do, just probably start with the opposite of whatever it was they were doing. Now that doesn't absolutely guarantee you're right, but you're probably going to be pretty close. Right, so if a weight loss client comes, because you always get these elevator speeches, right? You get the elevator, person's like, oh, you're a fitness trainer, cool. Yeah, what do I do to lose weight? Oh man, it could be 100 things, right? So I usually ask them, okay, briefly, what have you done so far? What do you do for exercise? Oh, I'm on the treadmill all the time. Okay. What do you do for nutrition? I don't know, I just kind of eat whatever. Okay. So I would say, all right, so just do the opposite of whatever you were doing before. So don't worry about the treadmill. Go find some weights. Just pick them up, put them over your head. I don't really care what you do with them. For food, how about you just write down what you ate so you have an idea of what you're doing? Oh, okay. So usually starting with the direct opposite of wherever they are is probably going to be pretty good. So I've even told this to clients who come in. They go down through the whole list of everything, and they're like, well, I don't understand why I would do the opposite. Like, well, the reality is what you did led you to me, and the reason you're here is that you're not happy with your current results. So that tells me whatever you're doing probably isn't working so well. So start with the opposite, and that'll usually get you pretty close. So that can be kind of for mindset stuff too. Next. So what is an example of this? So I talked to a coach the other day, literally like 2 days ago, who was working with a client who we were talking about, food issues and stuff. And she says she has a really hard time with sweets, but she's convinced that they're bad and horrible for her. But she still eats them and then still feels bad and horrible about herself. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, what does she do? She's like, well, she works with the president and she's at, the White House like every other week. And for whatever reason, she was saying they have brownies there. So I'm like, oh, okay. So go to the next slide. Which gets into a little bit of a tangent about, I don't think there should be really any morality in exercise and food. Do whatever you want, CrossFit, powerlifting, endurance, I don't really care. Just don't do speed walking, it's so stupid. It's like just walk or run, just pick one of the others. Everything else is cool, I don't care. And like for nutrition stuff, and this is the hardest part to get people to unlearn, right? If people ask us, like, if you could, you're the czar of all health and nutrition stuff, you could wave your magic wand and have people just do one thing overnight, what is it? Like, just get rid of all your goofy ideas about food, right? You know, your food should not have morality, because you eat clean or not clean doesn't make you a better or worse person. It's just whatever you do. Yes, some things will get you closer to your goals. Some things will get you farther away from your goals, but it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Last thing on that too, a lot of clients are convinced that, you guys have all heard of superfoods, right? That, oh yeah, it's a superfood, so I'm good. I can eat 4 Twinkies now, right? And I'm like, well, what makes it a superfood? And there's usually some fabled tale about, you know, some one-eyed pygmy guy in the jungle somewhere in the middle of the Amazon, you know, harvesting these sacred berries with, you know, 2 piranhas stuck to his ass. Or whatever. And that's, oh, this is a superfood, right? Just because it's rare doesn't mean that that is like the best thing for you to eat all the time. Because then they get weird that, oh, I can't eat my superfood. Oh, my nutrition's all gone to hell. You know, so anyway, so there's a lot of unlearning people have to do about all this kind of stuff. So next. So what do you do with that? In the case of Obama and the brownie. So I want to change their current association first. So we'll use the example of a brownie. So I would ask them, can you have a brownie and not feel bad about it? Right? Because most people initially would say, well, just don't eat the brownie, right? So if I told you, you know, the analogy I've used before, don't think of a pink elephant. What did you think of? Pink elephant, right? Because your brain thinks visually, right? What if I said, how big is the main window in your living room? How did you figure out the answer to that? You picture yourself standing in your living room, right? And go, oh, it's about, you know, X tall, right? So we think very visually. So telling someone to not do something just doesn't work very well. So I would say, can you have a brownie and actually enjoy it? The reality is having 1 brownie a week is not going to destroy all your gains, no matter what the interwebs tells you, right? So I would see, can I change that current association into the future first? Then can I do it again? Maybe again, right? Because repetition always helps with that. So they say, okay, yep, I can do that. So can they do it maybe in different associations? Could they go out with a friend, maybe have a brownie, not feel guilty about it, right? And you can use all your cool education stuff and, you know, why people eat, homeostatic versus hedonic, all that kind of stuff. So you're just trying to get them to change that association. And you're working on the thing that's in the future first. So next slide. And then once they get a fair amount of those built up, I would then see if I could change their past associations. Because now I kind of set up a little bit of cognitive dissonance, right? So wait a minute, you just told me you had last week, you had a brownie once a week for 4 weeks and you didn't feel bad about that, so why do you feel bad about eating a brownie from the President of the United States of America? Right? If Obama offered me a brownie, I'd be like, wow, that's pretty cool. Right? Tell everyone about that, right? And they're like, oh, well, I don't know. So you're trying to get them to change the current ones first, and then hopefully over time, it'll change their past ones. There's other skill sets we use, right? Telling them memory is not necessarily fixed, and other skill sets you can use with that. But the past associations, the longer that they've had them, are probably going to be harder to change. So I would not necessarily start with that. Plus, from an action standpoint, they already ate it anyway, right? I mean, there isn't much you're going to go back and change with that. Yep, almost done. So, you can only take away 4 things. It's a little bit after lunch here. First thing, next. So bubblegum, what do you take away from bubblegum?
More hair,
More hair, more connections, right? Then don't stick it in your hair. Unless you're Brian, you can get away with that.
Yep, or Gary.
Or Gary. Yeah, Gary'd be all right. What do you take away from that one?
Choose easiest. Choose success. Choose
Green is good.
Great is good.
The easy wins first.
Yeah, get the easy wins first, right? You know, the clients are actually kind of hoping, I think, that you'll kind of rig the system because a lot of them really need to see some success, right? Cool, next. Security blanket, what do you take away from that?
We'll take it.
For a while.
Change it last.
Yeah, probably not the first thing you're going to change. More associations, harder to change. And that's, just in my brief experience with trainers on these concepts, that's a hard one, because it'll bug the piss out of you. the fact that I would have someone do this cornball exercise, I may actually lead them through how to do it. Oh, that's really hard for me. Next. And what do you take away from that?
Do the opposite.
Do the opposite.
Yep, when all else fails, do the opposite. Yep, my last couple of minutes. So if you want to go down the summary, so either you're in or out, right? So Vince talked about all in. You can rig the system, take the low-hanging fruit first. Security blankets, probably going to be the hardest thing for them to change. If you think of associations, it's going to be a little bit easier. And then when all else fails, you can just do the opposite. One more. And a bonus, just because everyone loves science, right? There's a thing called BDNF, so brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this is actually what someone called sort of brain fertilizer. So if you're doing these other actions, you're actually facilitating their changing of their mindset much faster. So I kept looking for a way of like, how do you kind of hit like the turbo button on all this? Because it seems really slow and arduous. And most of the stuff people are doing, exercise, fish oil, sunlight, sleep, berries, possibly intermittent fasting. So those things all help increase BDNF. When that's higher, all those processes actually run much better too. So that would be just an added bonus. And then the last one is sleep. If you're really working, we didn't go into the learning aspect of this, but you can argue sometimes unlearning is a little bit of a learning aspect. There's a ton of data showing that sleep and memory consolidation really helps a lot. So if you have a client and you're just pounding your head against the wall and you're trying all this stuff and nothing's working, I would really look at their sleep habits. If they tell you, I sleep 4 to 5 hours a night and I'm stressed out of my mind, you're probably going to have to deal with some of those things first before you may be able to do more of the mindset stuff. I'm not saying don't try, I'm just saying I would definitely look at that first, because otherwise it's much, much, much harder. Because they're taking it and they're listening to it, but they have a really hard time with the consolidation part. So then they come back the next time, it's like, wow, did we ever talk about this like the last 6 weeks? What's going on? Right, so look at their sleep, possibly their stress. Last one. There's a bunch of references there. So I think I got, 1 minute maybe if needed?
Enjoy.
So any other questions on that? Yeah.
You didn't mention water. So how much does water play a role in changing some of this stuff?
I don't know, to be honest. I even tried looking to see how much, as I'm drinking water, how much water does someone need per day? And the recommendations are all across the board, unless you're in an extreme environment. It does appear that water plus movement is much better because the fascia or the connective tissue will take up more water. In terms of brain changes, I haven't really seen too much. So
one of the first courses I took online, 8 years ago or whatever, talked about how we need 2 liters of water to think clearly. So that's what I was asking. Yeah, and I can't figure out where any of those stuff comes from, to be honest. There's a lot of really good stuff on different environments and exercise, but I just asked people, it's like, hey, how about this? You drink more water and then move around a little bit more. How did you feel? Or the other experiment I'll have them do is on a day that you're really not going to move much, maybe you've got a lot of desk work to do, just drink a crap ton of water, see how much you piss out. All right, now the next day, get up every 20 minutes, just do a couple of bodyweight squats, walk around, run up and down your stairs a few times, do 2 push-ups, real light, then sit back down again. Again, purely anecdotally, they tend to whiz a lot less then, right? Because you're pushing more of the water probably into the fascial tissue. So that's, not much research based on that, but something to try. Do you have a question? Yeah.
The brain fertilizer, what type of berries work the best? Does it could be antioxidants?
Yeah, it's primarily the anthocyanins in them. So blackberries, blueberries, strawberries. Usually the darker ones are a little bit better. So one thing I've done with clients is super easy. Go to Target, buy some frozen berries, throw them in your blender, squeeze in a couple lemons and limes. If you want to grab some fresh cilantro, throw that in there, and then just blend it up. If you want to add some protein to that, go ahead. You're pretty set. There's really not that many calories, super high in micronutrition, that kind of stuff. Does help with eyesight and some other stuff too. So, yep. Good question. Anything else?
Mike?
Yeah.
I recently read something about the hippocampus cortex relationship with memory dumping.
Yeah.
Does any of that stuff apply here? Where does that fit in?
Yeah.
Think about, worry about?
Yeah, so he's asking about basically how the brain is processing memories and stuff, and I don't have a good answer other than it has to happen at some point. So the fancy word for the process is what's called LTP, or long-term potentiation. The process of how you take short-term memories and try to get them to be much more long-term memories. I go into that more in the level 2 in the learning phase. So briefly, you can try to make as many associations on demand or as possible. So how do we take in information, right? So we have eyes, movement, different ways. And if you can incorporate more of those ways into it, you'll actually do better. So let's say you're going to study for an exam. This took me years to figure out. And okay, so I have to be able to recall something on the exam. So I'm going to study it. I'm probably going to write it out, right? So I visually see it. I've got a motor action of writing. I will write it on different pieces of paper in different locations. I'll use different colors, so now I have a visual input of a change in color. When I try to recite it, I'll walk around in between or even as I'm doing it. And then I'll also, when I go to recall it, actually change my environment. Because my environment is probably a test-taking environment, which is not the same as, say, my kitchen table. So can I recall it now in a different environment, in a different context? And in a perfect world, you would start doing that, which no college student I've ever taught really does this, other than a few, probably 4 or 5 days out before the exam. Scary, I know. Because you want sleep to help process, so sleep does help the transfer of that process much better. It's debatable as REM sleep or slow wave sleep. So then you would quiz yourself the next day. Okay, so I learned this, I did pretty good, I went to bed, I got up the next day. Okay, how much of that did I retain? Oh, 70%. Oh look, I missed this whole chunk on the right-hand side of the page. It's all written in black ink. Okay, maybe I should write that somewhere else, or type it, or change the color, or do something different now to purposely create more of those associations. So it's almost like you're literally trying to tangle the bubble gum into your hair. You're creating those more associations actually on purpose. And then when you recall it, you're changing the environment a little bit too. So it's a very similar process, but it's more geared to just learning. So it's kind of a long-winded answer. And it's in the level 2 and module 3, so.
Boom. Buy it now.
Buy it now! Yes?
What about on, I guess where I'm going with this, like parents, right? They're telling their kids, they're working with the athlete, and they look at something, they say to them, hey, this is what you need to improve upon, but the kid won't listen, so that's why coaches have jobs, basically, right? Is, okay, I'll listen to what you say, but I won't listen to the exact same thing my parents are saying. What is it in terms of like the relational part? I mean, I'm pretty sure I understand, the answer a little bit more, but the source of where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Part of like, so if a coach is an ass versus a coach that is very, cool spirit, all whatever, all that stuff, the kids, like the learning, them taking it in from this guy versus this guy.
Yeah, I would say briefly, part of that is somewhat of proximity bias. So you could be a parent and be like world-renowned coach, and you probably have a really hard time teaching your own kid, right? I mean, everyone's seen this, right? I know, top surgeons in the world, their mom still, goes and get off with some other person, right? My mom still calls me. I saw Dr. Oz the other day. Oh God, And it's like the same conversation all the time. We've talked about something multiple times, but Dr. Oz said this. Man, she's with Dr. Oz on that, So I think there's that, and there's also, I think, just a lot of it's just a rapport and that type of thing. What the kid, in terms of believes in and that type of thing, I think affects how much they literally really gets to their brain, right? Part of that's a reticular activating system, and if they're not there to learn and they believe that Coach X, for whatever reason, is not going to help them, they're just not going to pay attention. Nothing's probably going to get through, right? So in that case, I'd look at their state or their mood, making sure that's their top priority, and then give them more information. So if they're not even paying attention and their state is somewhere else entirely, probably doesn't matter what you say at that point. So prioritizing their state and mood would help facilitate getting more information in at that point. But it's not an easy thing.
Yeah, how can you explain it to parents in an organization dealing with some parents and coaches that are involved? Like those are the key points, right? Like how do you just what do I need to say to them to like connect the dots and go, this is the main, this is what we have to focus in on. This is what we have to
Yeah, usually I go more with the proximity bias, and if they can find in the parent's example that's coming to you for the explanation, ask them what they do. Oh, I'm a CPA. Oh, cool. Did anyone in your family hire you to do taxes? No, they just ask me questions about it all the time. Oh, do they think you're a bad CPA? I don't know, they've never hired me, right? So some example that may be similar that they can relate to, you know, and try to use that angle a little bit. It's still hard.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks, Ross.
All right, thank you guys all, appreciate it.